Hi, my name is Kenny, and I am one of the co-founders of Manta Network. And I think before I want to kind of talk specifically to you guys today, I want to start off with a little bit of background about who I am, what I do, and what the heck is Manta. So a little bit about myself. I've been in crypto for a little bit now. Started my first company in the tech space in cloud computing, and that's how I got into crypto, specifically around Bitcoin mining. And after that, one thing led to another, tried to create an options trading platform, messed up on that, did some content writing, thought leadership, went to business school, found my identity, decided to work on privacy. And here I am with Manta Network, and here I am on stage with you guys. And so Manta Network, what we're specifically working on within the Polkadot ecosystem is building a privacy layer so that all parachains can access privacy without having to have their own sort of in-house cryptography team. So the way you can think of it is privacy as a service, right? And so now you have private NFTs, private DeFi products, private lending, private exchanging, private transacting, et cetera, all within the Polkadot ecosystem. And we have a Kusama canary net called Calamari. So it's in Kusama as well. But with that being said, so quick question to the audience. What do these brands have in common? Audi, Facebook, and Sephora. All right, don't raise your hands all at once. Okay, I'll drop another hint. Ledger also belongs in this category. No, still nothing? Okay, well, here. So, I guess there's some formatting issues here, but these are all companies that have leaked your data. Obviously not on purpose, not intentionally, but these are all sort of hacks that had happened in the past decade. This is, of course, just a handful of these types of companies, pardon the formatting issues, but the idea here is that even these large players, hopefully all these names on here are names that everyone recognizes. These are all very large players in different areas, right? Neopets, digital pets that everyone kind of has and as a pocket keychain. Naughty America, pornography. Coachella, music, right? Facebook, for those of you that don't know Facebook, that's the old name of Meta. Audi, right, the car company. These are all household brands. These are all brands in the Web2 space that users individually have trusted their data to. And these are also brands that have, unfortunately, at some point in time in the past decade, leaked anywhere between a couple million records, 600K records, all the way to 500 million records. So 500 million individual users being exposed, right? What sort of information is actually exposed here? Who's leaked your name? These companies have leaked your name in the data exposures. Okay, so people on the internet know your name in the black market. Who cares? Whatever. What about your email? These are the companies that have leaked your emails along with your name. So, okay, now they know your name, now they know your email. So now the black market is getting somewhere with your identity. Okay, great. What about this? Your password. Your passwords to these sites are also leaked. Usually the passwords are leaked in the form of hashes, but Comcast generously leaked it in plain text form, so people know your literal password. But I mean, how many, well, I guess for security reasons, don't raise your hand. But I'm assuming that not many people have more than like 2 or 3 variants of your password. And even if they're variants, right, I mean, I wouldn't count like adding an exclamation mark or 2 as a variant to your password, right? That's easily guessable. But the idea here is that, once you know your password from one of these entities, then it's very easy to sort of attack you on other platforms, right? We know your email, we know your name, we know your password. What else do we know? We know your address, your physical address. All right, so now we know your name, your email, your password, your physical address. Oh, look, there's Ledger. 1 million people exposed in the Ledger hack, and we have the addresses of all these Ledger owners, right? Not just like normal addresses, but like where these ledgers were all mailed to, right? And so now, right, what sort of nefarious purposes can be implied from that, right? And so like this is really just the tip of the iceberg. I would invite you all to go to this website called haveibeenpwned.com. have, like HAVE, I, the letter I, bin, BEEN, pwn, PWNED.com. You can Google it. When you go to this site, all you have to do is put in your email, and it'll tell you where all your records have been exposed, on what websites, what applications, and exactly what's been exposed about you on the black market. These are some other things that we can figure out about you. Your gender, right? Whether you're a male or female. Your sexual fetishes, obviously, because, I don't know if you guys have heard of, like, the Ashley Madison hack, which was kind of more like a ransom. It was some sort of Bitcoin ransomware of Ashley Madison, which is this website that promotes infidelity. And then I don't think the ransom was ever paid. And so the leaks are all exposed, right? So, like, we know your sexual fetishes, your drug habits, because when you enter dating sites, you put in information like your drug habits, and then those dating sites expose your data. Your ethnicity, your religion, your license plate, your income, how much tax you've paid, right? I mean, like, these data breaches aren't just of private or publicly traded commercial companies, but these are also of government entities. These are direct attacks on citizens at a nationwide level. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure we can come up with some of the bad things we can do with all this information, right? So the idea here is that the Web 2 privacy problem isn't solved. In fact, in Web 2, there's a strange user behavior where there's a strong link between trust of the individual with an entity that, they probably know no one or know nothing about, in terms of, like, okay, I don't know the CEO of Facebook, right? I mean, I don't just call up Mark and be like, hey, are you protecting my data today? It doesn't work like that. There's a direct disconnect between the user and an entity, but there's a disproportionate amount of trust in the entity. But we see from these examples that this type of system is not sustainable, right? Because there's a lot of error in how privacy is preserved and how user data is protected. This could be technical error, whether it's bugs in the code. This could be human error, whether it's phishing sites or some type of social engineering. But the idea here is that once the centralized entity is compromised, the Facebooks the Metas of the world, the Audis of the world, then the compromiser has direct access to thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of records, right? And so that's what we can fix with Web3, because Web3 is all about self-sovereignty. It's not like any individual platform has any data on you that you don't have yourself. In fact, they shouldn't need to hold any data about you because it's all stored on your own blockchain identity. And so the theory is, if somehow your records are exposed, then it should be just you, right? It should be not everyone else on the platform. But the problem is that Web3 privacy isn't solved. In fact, there is no privacy on Web3 right now. And it's even worse because in Web3, there is no centralized entity. There is no one that is promising some protection of your identity. And so what happens in Web3 is you go and you join some NFT marketplace. You buy some NFTs, and it seems pretty innocent, right? Until maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you regret buying that NFT because somehow it was associated with, like, I don't know, some really bad things, right? Like the owners, the creators of those NFTs have used those funds to go and murder baby cows in, like, I don't know, Sudan or something. And there's this whole internet explosion. It's like now all of a sudden people are all angry at everyone who supported this. And there's an on-chain record of you innocently supporting this because you like this NFT image of a baby cow, but you had no idea that they were going to do all these bad things with baby cows. And so now, right, you're stuck because the blockchain's immutable. You can't delete it. There's public record, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so this is a very contrived example, but the idea here is that there's no privacy layer. There's no way for you to protect your own identity, your own information, and that information can be used against you without your consent in many different ways. On a very contrived level, such as the example I just gave, on a corporate level, when it comes to being hired, on an insurance level, when it comes to deciding what your monthly rates are, et cetera, et cetera. And so without solving this issue, the question becomes, how do we really scale Web3 to like 1 billion users, right? Because right now, yeah, in the room, there's like 20 of us. And it's like, okay, fine, if they expose all our records, we're fucked, but the rest of the world's okay. But if you expose 3 billion people's records, right? Like, I mean, what does that become? So when we talk about adoption, right, without privacy, this type of adoption on a massive billion people scale just becomes a huge surveillance apparatus. And I'm not talking about surveillance from like government that you might not care about or very much care about, right? This is surveillance on the individual level, this is surveillance on the corporate level, and it is surveillance on the government level. But even on the government level, it's not just about your own government looking at your information and tracking you. It's about all the enemies of the state also looking at your information and tracking you, right? It creates this complex game theory of exactly what people can do with your data on chain, as long as all the records are public. And I just want to note that, you know, you're probably listening to me and you're like, okay, I don't care if, like, you know, Sudanese government decides to monitor my Uniswap activities. Yeah, sure, that's what it is today, right? It's just silly little activities, yield farming, getting NFTs, et cetera, but what is blockchain, what does Web3 look like 5 to 10 years from now? Right? I'm assuming that we're all in this room because we believe that there's an opportunity to really grow it, right? And growing it means introducing more use cases, getting more users, et cetera, but now, 10 years from now, you go to a coffee shop and you buy a coffee and you pay with your DOT, and your transaction's on chain in a matter of like 20 seconds. And so anyone in the world knows that you've just gone to this Starbucks and you just purchased this coffee at this time. And they look through your on-chain records and they say, oh, you go to this Starbucks every Monday through Friday, right? Like, what can people do with that information? And so when we hit 1 billion users, the question is, how do we get there, and how do we get there with privacy? Oh, man, there is some formatting issues here. Okay, so bear with me here. So how do we scale privacy to 1 billion users with privacy? Or sorry, how do we scale with privacy to 1 billion users on Web3? So first of all, is on the individual level, fundamental human rights. And we're not talking about just human rights for humans, but human rights for organizations, for entities, right? That can very much act and behave in a humanly way and affect other individuals. Also, fixing broken use cases. The use cases on Web3 today, I argue that 95% of them they work in a very small ecosystem, but if you really want to scale it, they're pretty broken. And I'll get into that in just a second. And the third one is we can create more use cases that can exist without privacy. And so first of all, fundamental human rights, what does that mean, right? Like the individual we've already talked about, but what about corporate privacy, right? I think like one of the trending topics now is how do we move organizations on chain, right? Decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs. But how do you really create a DAO if everything is forcibly 100% transparent? In theory, that sounds great, right? Like everyone has access to all the information, et cetera, et cetera. That's awesome. But in practice, it becomes a really big problem, right? And there's a reason, for example, now why something like payroll is private. Because it's not just about employees knowing how much each other are paid. But imagine if you work at, I don't know, company, let's say you work at Target. And now Walmart wants to hire you, right? And so Target has to worry about Walmart knowing exactly how much Target's already paying you, right? And so like it creates this complexity in terms of just competitive advantages for the corporations in order to, keep their advantage. Also, that kind of brings me back to, just DAOs in general. Governance, there's a lot of use cases for utility tokens right now, specifically around governance, right? But I think for those of you guys that have in the past participated in governance or seen governance votes, you can tell that governance right now is actually really broken. About 0.2% to maybe 1% of the token supply, maybe 1% of the token supply, is used in actual, like, majority of on-chain governance votes. And so the question is, what happens to the other 99%? What happens to the other 99.8%? Why aren't those people voting, right? And so like I've spoken to a lot of these founders who have very strong community-based kind of organizations. And one of their chief complaints about the voting system is they often get private messages from their own community members. And their community members tell them, okay, I'm actually really against this proposal. And I want you to know that, but I'm not going to vote for it, right? Or I'm not going to vote against it, right? Because I don't want the whole community knowing that this whale is like, kind of voting against the community, because imagine that sort of backlash. So they just don't end up voting. And so one, the publicness of the votes creates a disincentive for people to vote against community sentiment, or what they perceive as community sentiment. Two is that they may just altogether vote with the community because they feel like their votes don't really matter if it's not on a significant level. And so with that being said, right, like how can you really scale that out and call it a true democracy if you know that your voting system is broken? And so I think definitely on the privacy side, adding privacy to on-chain governance would be a step forward in the organizational processes. On-chain gaming. On-chain gaming is, I wouldn't say it's broken, but it can definitely be improved, right? And so, how many of you guys have played like StarCraft? Okay, cool. So, the really fun thing about StarCraft, in my opinion, is when you play with other players and you're in this map, and for those of you that don't know, right, like it's a gigantic map, and in this gigantic map, all you have is your own little area to start off. You know what's around in your little environment, but you have no idea where other players are. You have no idea what they're doing, you don't know what they're building, et cetera, and that's all part of the strategy, right? You have to kind of adapt. You send out little drones to help you figure out the map, they search the map, they find enemies, et cetera, and then like you build adaptively. You can't build this on chain right now, right? Because a lot of the games you see, obviously, are just like centralized games with some sort of like token economics to it. But the games, the pure on-chain games that you want to design with that sort of strategy in place can't be done without privacy, because otherwise anyone can just check the blockchain to see the entire state of the game, right? And so like a very simple example of this would be poker. I have a poker hand, you have a poker hand. How are we going to play poker completely on-chain if I can just check the blockchain and see exactly what hand you have, right? Like that defeats the whole purpose. And so adding this layer of privacy allows you to create that privacy for the state of games to improve the gameplay and create like much better on-chain gaming experiences. Enterprise applications. Everyone's talking about enterprise. We see like there's a lot of movement from Polygon right now, and one of the big barriers for enterprise application is privacy, because when we talk about an enterprise application, I'm not talking about like Web2 application that should just either die or transform, but I'm talking about applications that reach millions, if not billions of users at a single time. And these organizations, will be some of you guys in the future, are concerned about the privacy for their user. And so how do you create like a Western Union and do all this cross-border remittance on-chain if people can track all the transactions that are happening at any point in time, right? How do you safely send your money to your family in a warring nation without having it tracked by, the enemies of that state? Yeah, and consumer applications, Ubers, coffee, Starbucks, et cetera. What I just kind of gave as an example. And so, I've talked about all this. I've instilled the fear of lack of privacy in you. And now the question becomes, if it's so important, why isn't it solved? I think the big problem is user experience. And so without that user experience, right, it's very hard for people to jump 2 or 3 extra steps just to include privacy into their user behavior. And so instead of pushing privacy onto the user, I think it's a much better solution to actually integrate privacy directly into the application layer and then allow users to experience the same user experience of using the same application, but now having that added benefit of privacy directly built in. It's like the difference between getting a glass of water at a restaurant and the restaurant waiter goes in, grabs your water, and serves it to you, versus you go to a restaurant and you say, I want a glass of water, and the waiter's like, okay, well, there's a well outside, and you can just go to the well and fish out your own water, right? Like in that case, you might not want the water. And we think like a lot of the applications of privacy today on chain are very much like the well analogy. Whereas, you know, we want it to be more of that like restaurant, bring the water to you sort of application. And so that's why with Manta Network, we're building privacy for parachains, right? We're not directly targeting each individual user and saying, hey, take these extra steps to go outside of privacy. Instead, we're leveraging Polkadot and we're leveraging the cross-chain messaging to start integrating Manta Network's privacy with other parachain assets. So one of the things that we're releasing right now that you can try out on testnet is what we call Dolphin testnet. And this is a testnet that allows you to see on-chain, it's like a fully functional, operational node. But it shows you exactly how it operates in terms of privatizing other parachain assets and then transacting and swapping those assets privately with other users within the Polkadot ecosystem. But yeah, so that's us. We're trying our best to enable a user-friendly privacy experience using zero-knowledge proofs. And yeah, there are some ways that you can kind of join us, follow us, and we are hiring. We're always hiring talented people. We've recently expanded into looking at hiring on the business side as well. So, definitely, if you're interested in privacy, on-chain privacy specifically, and obviously you're interested in Polkadot, or why else would you be here? Come talk. Thank you, guys.